Hi folks, welcome back to Mask Off, the only show where the left's cultural meltdown moves faster than a TikTok trend with daddy issues. I'm Dennis Feitosa, aka Def Noodles, and today we're diving straight into how feminism is destroying America. It is destroying America, folks, whether people want to admit to it or not. At first, feminism was sold as a way for women to gain equal status in society, and once that status was achieved, it very quickly morphed into a full-on demolition crew aimed at the family unit, masculinity, and now basically every institution we rely on as a nation. From the army to the church, the feminization of American institutions has paved the road to soft Marxism on one end and a bizarre cultural flirtation with militant ideologies like radical Islam on the other. So today we're looking at what some of these feminists are actually saying, the unhinged rhetoric they're pushing, and what we can expect in the future, because the same rights they fought for just about a century ago are at risk of being stripped from them by their own political choices as they continue empowering forces that undermine Christian morality, theology, and every foundation this country was built on, all while ushering in belief systems that don't persuade with a word, but rather with a sword.
On the topic of the patriarchy, I can't stop thinking about this. Western religion has millions of people devoting their entire lives to a man, an omniscient being in the sky that claims via anecdotal text to have created life and created the world as we know it, when in real life, every day, women are creating eyeballs from scratch, brain stems, human beings. We are creating human beings with our bodies, and men still would prefer to worship a god, a male god, because he claims to have created life. We have no evidence that God created life, and yet women are not worshipped simply because we are women. I'm so done. I'm so done.
Needless to say, everything this woman just said is objectively retarded, and not just retarded in a one person ranting to herself into her phone in her garage kind of way. This clip is a perfect snapshot of what happened to the American left. They traded faith for identity politics only to act shocked when everything around them just continuously falls apart. Now, she starts by comparing the biological process of pregnancy to the divine act of creation ex nihilo, as if gestation and genesis are the same thing. They're not. One is participating in a natural design, the other is the metaphysical origin of existence itself. Human reproduction uses materials, that being DNA, and a design that already exists. We don't summon matter, consciousness, soul, or being into existence from nothing. We continue life. We do not originate it. That distinction is a cornerstone of every major theistic worldview. And collapsing it isn't profound. It's just spiritually illiterate. Now, she also declares without evidence that God doesn't exist and that Scripture is just anecdotal text. The irony, the New Testament is one of the most historically verified writings on the planet. Over 5,800 Greek manuscripts, more than 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and over 20,000 total across all languages, far more than any ancient text, whether Homer, Plato, or Caesar. Those manuscripts collectively affirm not only that Christ existed, but that early Christians believed in his crucifixion and resurrection. Calling the Bible anecdotal isn't edgy, it's just historically illiterate at this point. Now, more ironically, this woman demands worship for creating life while championing an ideology that actively destroys it. You can't claim divine status for bringing life into the world and simultaneously defend eliminating that same life when it's convenient for you. It's the core contradiction of modern feminism. Life is sacred only when it flatters the narrative and disposable when it burdens it. And the narcissism, by the way, is just completely out of this world with this woman. She unironically believes that because she experiences something, the entire universe must rearrange itself around her. In this worldview, personal experience outweighs biology, objective truth, and even God himself. Now, to be clear, she isn't dismissing God because she's skeptical. She's dismissing him because he competes with her at the top spot of the universe. But look, the real theological ignorance shows when she collapses the distinction between creator and creation, a line drawn clearly across multiple theologies, that being Christianity, Judaism, and even Islam. Humans participate in life, they don't author it. Claiming women deserve worship because they bear children violates the first commandment outright. It's neo-pagan goddess worship dressed up in TikTok language, an inversion of biblical truth. She also ignores the central Christian teaching that life is a gift, not a self-generated product. She talks as if the womb is a machine she engineered rather than something she was entrusted with. All of this makes evident that underneath her whole argument is a quiet attempt at self-deification, replacing God with woman, replacing the soul with biology, replacing transcendence with this weird gender identity, whatever she has. That's not empowerment, by the way. It's just spiritual delusion. Now, when you zoom out completely, this clip clearly exposes where the left currently is. They are scrambling to fill a spiritual void, but refuse to actually look upward or beyond their egos. So they seek inward. They worship their identities, their feelings, their biology, anything except God. They reduce the mystery of creation to just power dynamics. They rewrite morality around whatever biology or ideology is in vogue. This is what you get when a society spends decades teaching people to reject Christianity, reject tradition, reject family, reject masculinity, and enthrone the self as God. Once the self becomes God, theology turns into Instagram captions and doctrine becomes whatever gets the most likes, I guess. In the end, this clip exposes a culture severed from God, severed from humility, and severed from any grounding principle outside of the self. And when self-worship becomes the norm, absurdity itself isn't the exception, it's the doctrine. The tragedy is that people like her think they're preaching liberation when they're actually preaching societal decay. And unless America returns to a moral and spiritual foundation that recognizes God, not ego, as the author of life, this kind of thinking won't just persist. It'll become the default setting of our culture.
I said I wouldn't talk about my dating life on here, but I feel like I cannot be the only one who feels alone in this. Just went on a first date, and this is no offense to this man, obviously. Perfectly fine, normal, lovely date. It's getting to the point, though, that that's the problem. Like, there's just nothing happening. And I just feel no sparks and no chemistry with people. And I feel bad because I feel like it's just me. I'm going out with really handsome, accomplished, interesting people, and I feel nothing. I feel like I'm just another girl, and like I'm one of a million, and there's just nothing special about me. Probably not presenting that great either, not like that sparkly or interesting or like dynamic at all, because I'm just so depleted. I know my person's out there, but starting to really question if I even have it in me to find them anymore. I listened to Maisie Neely's book today, and through all of the hardships she had, she just kept going and kept dating and kept seeing people, and I admire people so much that have that in them because I just don't have it in me. I thought I was safe and I thought I was done, and like having to do this again just feels like work every time I go on a date. It feels like so hard.
That was actually unbelievably painful to witness. The crying, the vocal fry, the self-pity. It's like watching a generation raised on Disney movies realize in real time that the world doesn't work the way the TikTok algorithm promised them. And here's a hard truth you don't get to hear often. You are one in a million. That shouldn't devastate you. You've just been conditioned by modern culture to believe that you're supposed to be some kind of chosen, sparkly protagonist. You're not. Nobody's special. You could have $1 billion. That doesn't make you special. You could star in a hit movie of the year. That doesn't make you special. Absolutely nothing about your accomplishments or your feelings gives you cosmic importance. You're just a human being. In fact, you're not 1 in a million. You're actually closer to 1 in 8 billion. Now, I don't say that to dehumanize you because here's the paradox. The only thing that does make you special is the same thing that makes every single person on earth special. You're created in the image of God. That's your dignity. That's your value. But when you abandon that foundation, when you replace faith with feelings and humility with narcissism, you end up exactly where you're at. Crying in your car, filming yourself for strangers, begging for validation from people who don't even know your name and could care less. That's not stewardship of God's gifts. That's just mismanagement of everything He placed in front of you. And let's be brutally honest for a second. Posting yourself crying about your dating life is not going to solve your problems. It's not going to make you more attractive. It's not going to make you more stable or more fulfilled, for that matter. It's never been more evident that people who do stuff like this do it to stoke online sympathy in the same way millions of emotionally exhausted women now do, because the algorithm rewards this sort of dysfunction. But nobody actually cares. People are starving. People are literally dying. In Los Angeles alone, over 2,500 homeless residents die every single year in our streets. We have an entire generation that never even got a chance to live because of abortion, and yet here you are. You're mid-30 mids panicking about not feeling special in a date. You are the problem. Not because you feel lonely. Everyone feels lonely at some point, but because you refuse to accept any accountability for your own patterns and behavior. You go on dates with handsome, accomplished, interesting men, and you don't feel anything. That's fine. But instead of asking why your expectations are impossible, why your emotional bandwidth is depleted, why your standards have been shaped by social media and not real human experience, you just externalize it for more attention on the internet. You blame the world, you blame the dating culture, you blame men, you blame everything but yourself. This is the cultural rot feminism has created. Feminism stripped women of accountability and replaced it with perpetual victimhood. It told women they were princesses, victims, icons, revolutionaries, anything except humans capable of error. And that mindset has consequences, folks. It creates a dating culture where men are terrified of approaching women. Women are exhausted from endless options and don't fulfill them. And everyone is performing for the internet instead of growing as people and building families in the image of God.
Guys, I'm being so fucking serious. The next man that enters my life, he is required to take me out on 3 dates before he gets a sleepover and before he gets my clothes off. Okay,
wow,
I'm being so fucking for real right now because here's the thing. As soon as you spend the night with a man, not even doing anything, they stop asking you out on dates. Then, once you sleep with them, they don't want anything to fucking do with you anymore, which, like, whatever. I'm tired of men sexualizing me and objectifying me. Yeah, I've made it very easy for them to do that in the past, but, like, I'm done. I'm seriously fucking done. Like, hookup culture is fun for, like, 5 minutes. I miss connection. I miss having feelings. I miss being yearned for. I miss yearning.
Oh, God,
I can't just keep getting obsessed with a man for a week or two and then moving on to the next one. It's too exhausting and it's honestly like mentally draining. So seriously, the next guy that enters my life, he has to take me on 3 dates. Not sleepovers, not hang outside his apartment. He has to take me to in-person public activity dates, whether it's dinner, whether it's going on a walk, something. I am tired of a man being like, let's go on 1 date, and then you can come over, and you can just come over every time you want to hang out. No. What happened to romance? I want romance! Anyways, celibacy era is going great so far. So good.
Folks, you can't convince me that this isn't peak modern delusion, okay? This woman is saying she's in her celibacy era, which apparently now means not putting out until after 3 dates. Are you kidding me? If you want celibacy, try an actual year without sleeping with anyone. Try finding a man who's willing to do the same. I challenge you. And guess what? You can find those men. Women love to say, oh, they don't exist. They don't exist. They do. You're just not looking for them in the right places. You can't be fishing in a swamp and expecting to pull out salmon. You're going to pull out a frog, okay? If you want a man with discipline, faith, long-term vision, and actual values, stop searching in environments that reward the exact opposite. But this is where the whole thing collapses, okay? Because she's outraged that she goes on 1 or 2 dates, spends the night, maybe sleeps with a guy, and then he loses all interest. And instead of asking what her choices have to do with that pattern, she blames men as a collective force. Meanwhile, she's admitting on camera that she's built her entire dating life around immediate attraction, quick intimacy, and reward-based sex. She's literally telling the world here that intimacy is a transaction for her, a perk unlocked after 3 outings, like a loyalty punch card of sorts. And when you treat sex as a reward structure, connection becomes impossible. You're reinforcing the exact psychology that makes men view sex as a goal, not an actual bond. And by the way, she's posting this on the internet. You've just given every opportunistic guy the playbook to get into your pants. If he wants to sleep with you, he now knows it takes 3 cheap dates, a couple of free drink vouchers, and boom, he's in. And yes, there are morally low men who will take advantage of this. They'll get their win and move on. But guess what? They only thrive because the culture enables them. They are the symptom of the same dysfunction that this woman is participating in. If we had a culture of chastity, modesty, discipline, and real celibacy, not the TikTok version, you wouldn't have men scheming to get laid. You'd have men scheming to build a family. But this isn't just about dating, folks. This is about a society that inverted everything. We've replaced romance with convenience. We've replaced commitment with consumer choice. We replaced virtue with vibes. And the biggest shift, well, We replaced delayed gratification with immediate gratification as the highest possible good. Modern feminism told women that hookup culture was some form of liberation, that sexual detachment was empowerment, that rejecting traditional values was some kind of retarded progress. But now we're watching the bill come due, and women are exhausted. Men are de-incentivized from building families, and nobody trusts anyone. Nobody bonds, nobody connects. Just people cycling through 5 situationships a year and wondering why the hell they feel empty. This woman says she misses connection. She says she misses yearning. She says she misses something. Of course you do, okay? Humans are not built for disposable intimacy. The human psyche isn't designed for endless beginnings and no endings, okay? When your body is bonded to someone chemically, spiritually, emotionally, and then ripped apart over and over again, that literally drains you. All the neuroscience here is clear. Sex is bonding. Casual sex is just psychological contradiction. And after enough cycles of bond breaking, okay, you'll lose the ability to connect deeply at all. Your heart just builds up scar tissue, and it becomes hardened, and you become ugly. Inside and out. Now, folks, beyond the dating sphere, feminism has seeped into every major American institution, and it's having widespread negative effects. One of the most concerning areas is the judicial system, where a growing number of ideologically driven female judges, many of them shaped by modern feminist frameworks, are softening consequences, prioritizing so-called empathy over actual accountability, and letting violent offenders walk with little to no punishment. By the way, this isn't compassion. It's just a subversion of justice, and it's creating a system where criminals face fewer consequences while communities and women are actively paying the price.
At the August trial for Abdi Fattah Yusuf, the jury heard evidence that he ran his home health care company, Promise Health, out of a mailbox at a Central Avenue address where multiple other home health care companies were supposedly located. Yusuf and his wife, Lol Ahmed, were charged with stealing $7.2 million of taxpayer money through Medicaid overbilling in a personal care assistant, or PCA, scam. The couple allegedly spent tens of thousands of the fraud money on luxury items for themselves. Despite the jury swiftly convicting Yusuf, Judge Sarah West last week decided they got it wrong.
It's reversing or overturning a jury's verdict.
Defense attorney Joe Tamburino, who's not affiliated with this case, reviewed the decision and analyzed it for KARE 11 News. He says Judge West ruled that the state's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and that she believed the state did not rule out other reasonable inferences.
That, in fact, there could have been other reasonable theories other than guilt in this case. That's what it comes down to.
Despite the ruling, even Judge West wrote that she is troubled by the manner in which fraud was able to be perpetuated at Promise Health.
I was stunned.
State Representative Kristen Robbins, chair of the House Fraud Prevention and State Oversight Committee, says she's now reviewing if any state laws need to be tightened.
We want to strengthen state law so that we can get prosecutions out of these cases, because clearly a jury thought he was guilty.
Jurors in the case can't believe the decision.
I am shocked. I'm shocked based off of all of the evidence that was presented to us and the obvious guilt that we saw based off of the said evidence. It was not a difficult decision whatsoever. The deliberation took probably 4 hours at most. Based off of the state's evidence that was presented, I was beyond a reasonable doubt.
What's even the point anymore? You have a jury of 12 citizens, 12 people who sat through the trial, watched the testimony, examined the evidence, deliberated, and came to a unanimous decision. And then one judge just strolls in after the fact and says, actually, never mind. For what? Because she didn't like the outcome? Because she had a crisis of conscience? Because her feminist white guilt got to her? Because she suddenly decided that the law needs to make room for her personal feelings? The application of the law is supposed to be cold, consistent, and emotionless. You either break the law or you don't. You don't get to override a jury simply because you prefer a different leftist narrative. And that's what makes this case so disturbing. We're not talking about a close call here, folks. We're not talking about ambiguous evidence. We're not talking about a wrongful conviction built out of thin air. A jury convicted that man after reviewing the state's evidence. Evidence that he ran a fake Medicaid operation out of a mailbox, siphoned off $7.2 million in taxpayer money, and spent it on personal luxuries. The jury deliberated for roughly 4 hours. It's not confusion, that's clarity. One juror straight up said the evidence put him beyond a reasonable doubt. That's as textbook as it gets. But this female judge decided she knew better than 12 ordinary Minnesotans. She overturned the conviction on the grounds that the case relied on circumstantial evidence and that other reasonable theories weren't ruled out. Okay, except here's the problem. Most white-collar crime is circumstantial. Fraud happens on paper through invoices, billing records, bank transfers, shell companies, and documentation trails. That's literally how prosecutors build these cases. If you suddenly declare circumstantial evidence invalid, you just legalized half the fraud in America. And that's why this moment matters, folks, because it's not just about one defendant. Minnesota has been the epicenter of massive Medicare fraud for years. Billions have disappeared from the PCA system. Dozens of cases mirror this exact setup. Fake home health companies, fake assistants, fake claims, fake records, all siphoning real taxpayer money. If this ruling stands, it creates a precedent where white-collar criminals can say, well, someone else could have done it, or maybe I didn't know, and boom, charges dismissed. So what we're seeing with Judge West isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a larger pattern where modern feminist ideology has merged with progressive judicial philosophy to produce a culture of soft justice, a justice system that prioritizes emotional interpretation over legal obligation. The modern feminist worldview frames harsh consequences as inherently oppressive, punitive, or lacking compassion, and that mindset bleeds into the courtroom. Judges, many of whom were trained in law schools steeped in progressive activism, increasingly see themselves not as interpreters of the law, but as protectors of vulnerable identities for some reason. And because feminism today is not about equality, but about constantly redefining victimhood, you get rulings where accountability is softened, responsibility is downplayed at every level, and empathy is elevated above actual evidence. This is how you end up with a judge overturning a unanimous jury verdict in a $7.2 million fraud case. Not because the facts changed for some reason, but because the ideological lens through which she views the world refuses to accept that some people willingly exploit the system and will continue to do it if you allow them to do it. And this case is not an isolated misstep, by the way. It's part of a growing trend of judges, often shaped by modern feminist frameworks, working consciously toward the decriminalization of crime in America. Look at bail reform. Look at the refusal to prosecute theft under a certain threshold. Look at the diversion programs that treat violent offenders like misunderstood teenagers. Look at the leniency shown toward offenders who claim trauma or systemic injustice. This is the logical endpoint of a culture that prioritizes emotional narratives over moral order. Feminist-influenced judicial activism reframes criminals as victims, consequences as some form of oppression, and law enforcement as a patriarchal power structure. And the result, well, a justice system unable and increasingly unwilling to punish wrongdoing. See, when judges reject jury decisions, erase accountability, and redefine guilt through the prism of so-called empathy, they don't just undermine the law, they erode civilization's most important foundation. And civilization cannot run. We cannot run, folks. I can't stress this enough. A functioning society, when the people tasked with upholding order are ideologically committed to blurring the line between right and wrong.
I serve as Vice President for the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity.
The first time I came out on the bench and the deputy announced, all rise, the Honorable Judge Teresa Molina, the whole courtroom stood up and I was all excited. He's walking out there. And I saw an Illinois State Trooper. He was African American. He had a sleeve covering his tattoos. And he was standing there and he looked at me and he nodded. And I knew what that meant. And so I looked at him and I nodded back like, that's right, we're doing this. And it felt so good. It felt so good. So to me, a fine of $354, which is our normal no insurance fine, that's a lot of money. And some of the judges that I work with came from money, so $354 is no big deal. But to most of the people that come to my courtroom, it is a big deal. And so I always offer them the opportunity to do community service. Being Latina in the office, people would tell me, don't you feel like you're prosecuting your own people? But it's true. There were a lot of, defendants that look like me. However, I had a chance as a prosecutor to make a difference as to what cases come in. I had a chance as a prosecutor to decide what offers were appropriate. And so I always offer them the opportunity to do community service.
Now, in case you're wondering, folks, that judge, the one smiling on camera about how good it feels to be seen on the bench, was a judge who freed Lawrence Reed, a man with 72 prior arrests, who then went on to set a 26-year-old woman on fire on a Chicago train. 72 prior arrests, folks. Not 7, not 12, 72. And just weeks after she released him against warnings that he was a real and present threat, that warning was proven right in the most horrific way imaginable. And what we just witnessed in that video was the same judge openly admitting that skin color and ethnicity influence her rulings, that she factors identity into her judicial decisions more than the safety of the citizens she is sworn to protect. She sees criminals who look like her as her people and therefore deserving of special treatment. And because of that worldview, a violent, unstable man walked free and an innocent woman was burned alive. This isn't compassion, folks. This isn't equity. This is a complete moral inversion, treating criminals as victims and treating the actual victims of crime as collateral damage. Now, let's take a step back, okay, because this isn't just about one bad judge having a so-called bad day, okay? This is part of a much deeper ideological rot inside America's institutions. We have entered an era where identity politics has completely replaced any sort of objective standards, where empathy has replaced judgment, where the personal backstory of the offender is treated as more important than the suffering of the victim. And that shift, cultural, institutional, and philosophical, comes largely from the same modern ideology of feminized justice, a worldview that prioritizes emotional interpretation over the actual rule of law and subjective social narratives over objective public safety. For decades, the messaging in law schools and activist circles has been the same, that the justice system itself is oppressive, that punishment is patriarchal, that accountability is harsh and unfair, that criminals are systemic victims, and that judges should view themselves as social workers rather than actual arbiters of the law. And many of the judges who embrace that worldview, men and women alike, mostly women though, have internalized the idea that their role is not to uphold the law, but to reinterpret it in the light of race, gender, ethnicity, class, and lived experience. You know, the intersectional pyramid playing out in the justice system. And this judge, Melina Gonzalez, literally demonstrates that exact mindset. She's not talking about statutes. She's not talking about the burden of proof or legal principles. She's talking about how good it feels to be affirmed in her identity. She's talking about how defendants who looked like her shaped her decisions. She's talking about her values, not the law's actual requirements. This is precisely what happens when the judiciary stops seeing justice as blind and starts seeing justice as tribal. And the consequences are enormous. This is how we've ended up with skyrocketing crime in all major cities. This is why violent criminals return to the streets again and again and again until someone ends up burned alive or worse, dead. The cultural shift toward empathy first, feelings first, identity first justice has created a system where dangerous people cannot be contained because the system refuses to contain them, where the judge feels sorry for the perpetrator and the victim becomes an abstraction.
I thought that it was important that, especially in criminal cases, where when you have people that on one side of the bench, they can look at the judge and say, wow, she looks like me, so maybe I have a better shot.
Folks, the application of the law isn't about giving someone a shot. It's not supposed to be about hope, cosmetics, or how the judge makes you feel all fuzzy on the inside. It's about determining whether you committed the crime and what the consequences must be. When a judge says she wants defendants to look at the bench and think they have a better shot because she looks like them, she's openly confessing to an unequal application of the law. That's not justice. That's bias dressed up as empathy. And it's astonishing that she says this as if it's morally enlightened rather than a complete betrayal of her oath. And yet this is where we are in America. Judges openly stating that identity should shape outcomes. Judge Williams, that woman we just saw talk, who has already downgraded charges for a repeat offender who keeps attacking random white strangers in Cleveland, isn't prioritizing public safety or legal consistency. She's prioritizing emotional optics. She's signaling that race, identity, and representation are more important than actual impartiality and defending victims. And when the judiciary begins to think this way, you no longer have equal justice, folks. As I said earlier, you have tribal justice. You have factional justice. You have justice reimagined as a psychological comfort exercise rather than moral order. Now, to recap, folks, one of the core pillars of modern feminism is a dissolution of the family unit, an ideology that ultimately degrades women instead of empowering them. But it doesn't stop there. The next pillar, as we saw, is the unraveling of American institutions themselves. And we've already seen how deeply this rot has taken hold in the judicial system, with judges guided by ideology rather than law, creating chaos across the country, undermining public safety, and eroding trust in the very system meant to protect us. But the influence of modern feminism reaches beyond the courts, folks. It has infected cultural institutions, educational institutions, and political institutions as well. And the area we're about to look at is perhaps the most insidious and the most damaging, because modern feminism today isn't focused on fighting the so-called patriarchy anymore. Its goal is to dismantle masculinity altogether. And the method is simple: deconstruct the male identity from birth. Raise girls to transition into boys, raise boys to be non-binary or into gender identities that erase masculinity altogether. And when boys do remain boys, modern feminism pushes them toward the identity of trans women, which, let's be clear, are actually biological males. And there's no clearer example of this cultural push than Cynthia Nixon, the former Sex and the City actress, who just earlier this year gave this speech that embodies this ideology perfectly.
Most importantly, I am here today as the mother of a proud trans man. I am here today as the aunt of a proud trans man. My best friend's kid is trans, and my kid's best friend is trans. My wife and I, our lives are filled with the most amazing, beautiful, brave, trans people, young and old, but especially young.
Wow, this is crazy, dude.
My trans kid had his top surgery at NYU a number of years ago. His doctors were fantastic. His surgeon was the best we could have imagined. And the idea that the city is filled with young people who thought they had a place to go where they could receive the highest care, and that place has now been shut to them, sickens me to my core.
Let's start with the obvious, folks. What Cynthia Nixon just described is statistically impossible. According to the latest data from the Williams Institute at UCLA, an institution that is extremely pro-LGBT, by the way, about 0.6% of U.S. adults identify as transgender. Among minors, even with the explosion of social media influence and identity-based fads, the highest estimates hover around 1.4%. Those are fractions of 1%. So for Cynthia Nixon to have a child who is trans, to also have a trans nephew, to have her best friend's kid be trans, and for her own kid's best friend to be trans, the odds of that happening naturally without social contagion are not merely low, they're mathematically absurd and damn right impossible. You have a better shot at winning the Powerball while getting struck by lightning and bitten by a shark in the same afternoon than for this scenario to play out in reality. Something is going on here, folks, and it's not biology. It's not innate identity. It's not some mystical clustering of rare gender variants in one family and social circle. This is cultural transmission. This is ideological influence. This is what happens when you turn gender identity into a moral performance, a social currency, and a political badge. And yes, this is precisely why we're seeing an explosion of detransitioners, teenagers and young adults who are fast-tracked into hormone surgeries and irreversible changes, only to realize later that they were pushed into something they never fully understood. There are now dozens of lawsuits, dozens of public testimonies, and thousands of private stories of kids who transitioned early and now regret it, some permanently, because the damage cannot be undone. And here's the part Cynthia Nixon doesn't want to admit. This is all intentional. This isn't happening organically. This didn't arise from nature. This came from a highly coordinated ideological push that's been building inside academia, media, activist networks, and yes, feminist theory for decades. Modern feminism isn't about equality anymore. It isn't about women anymore. Its endgame is the destruction of masculinity, the erasure of the male identity entirely. And what's the fastest way to erase masculinity? You start redefining boys out of existence. You raise girls to believe they're boys. You raise boys to believe they're non-binary or genderless or trans women or whatever the hell you want to tell biological males nowadays. This is the trump card modern feminists have always wanted to play. They believe America is a patriarchal society built by and for men. And their goal isn't liberation, folks. It's replacement. They want a matriarchy. They want ideological dominance. And they want total cultural control. And ironically, they get the premise wrong right from the start. America was never some oppressive patriarchal hellscape. America was a form of Christendom, a society rooted in ordered liberty, moral discipline, and defined traditional roles that produced stability, family formation, and generational continuity. Those structures weren't oppressive. They were life-giving. They created a virtuous cycle, and now the cycle has been almost completely inverted. Instead of virtue reinforcing society, dysfunction completely erodes it. Instead of clarity guiding identity, confusion replaces it. Instead of family shaping children, ideology shapes them. Instead of parents grounding kids in God, activists ground them in gender theory. Cynthia Nixon isn't describing a family when she's talking here. She's describing a political project, a microcosm of a larger cultural agenda that's been injected into schools, entertainment, medicine, and law. And the rhetoric she uses, saying, "Oh, brave, beautiful assault, attack," isn't accidental. None of it is. It's the language of political warfare. It reframes every boundary, every safeguard, every medical concern as an act of oppression somehow. It frames every institutional pushback as violence. And it frames the ideological project of gender deconstruction as a moral crusade that must be followed so that the ultimate goal of feminism can be implemented into American society. Now, there are many more aspects of how feminism is destroying America that we could dig into. I could make a 3.5-hour video and still barely scratch the surface. But these three themes are the clearest right now: the ideological dismantling of the family, the corrosion of our institutions, and the deliberate unraveling of masculinity. This fusion of feminist and Marxist ideology is creating a spiritual vacuum in American society, and the vacuum is already being filled. History shows us that no society survives without a theology grounding it. Even China, supposedly atheistic, replaced religion with a theology of the state. That's what Marxism always does. And when that foundation weakens, something else always rushes in. We've seen it with the Iranian Revolution, which had that vacuum filled by Islam, and the Cultural Revolution in China, which had, as I mentioned, that vacuum filled by Marxism, and the countless other nations that hollowed out their spiritual core and ultimately paid the price. That's the real endgame here, folks. Hollow out American Christianity, bastardize a constitution which is built upon Christian principles, and replace both with a new moral order where activists and ideologues get to sit at the top of the hierarchy they claim to despise. This isn't about compassion or justice or even liberation. It's about power, raw, unrestrained political power. And here's a question every American has to confront right now. When a movement demands the destruction of your faith, your family, and your identity, and you witness it progressing, are you witnessing actual progress or a slow motion coup? When a culture is taught to hate the values that built it, what future is being prepared to replace it? Because make no mistake, folks, something will replace this. And the only reason this project won't ultimately succeed is because the people of God, those who understand truth, responsibility, and what holds a civilization together, are starting to wake up. We're slow to anger, but we will finish this culture war. The only question that remains is, how quickly will you allow yourself to see the truth for what it is? You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.